you ever watched someone take a bow for a performance you funded, not just accept praise? Actually bow. That's how I found out I wasn't on the guest list for my own daughter's clinic opening. The bow came second, the silence from her came first. A colleague of mine from the hospital had sent me a message that Saturday morning, a screenshot from LinkedIn, one of those polished event photos with the warm lighting and the champagne flutes catching the glow. My daughter in the center, laughing in a cream blazer, her husband beside her with his arm around her shoulder, like he built the whole thing out of thin air. The caption said, "Grand opening, celebrating the launch of our dream, post 3 weeks after the fact." I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment listening to the sound of the heating system clicking on. It was February in Ottawa. The windows had that fine film of condensation along the edges. I had made coffee already but hadn't touched it. My name is Winifred Baxter, and I have never once confused generosity with surrender. The $174,000 I paid to clear my daughter's student debt was not a gift given in a moment of softness. It was a decision made at a desk, with a spreadsheet open and a conversation happening over the phone with my financial advisor, because I had already run the numbers 3 different ways and I knew exactly what I was doing. When you spend 31 years working your way from ward nurse to director of patient services at a regional health authority, you learn that sentiment is expensive and structure is cheap. I paid off her debt so she could open that clinic without a millstone around her neck. I paid it off so she could start clean. I did not pay it off so that 3 years later I would be reading a LinkedIn post the same way a stranger reads the news. I texted her, kept it simple, saw the post, looks like the opening went well. I didn't hear back for 4 hours. When she finally called, it was her husband's voice I heard in the background first. Low, reassuring, coaching. Then she came on. "Mom, I was going to call you." I told her I was sure she was. She said the opening was really just a soft launch, just close colleagues and a few investors. Nothing formal. She said it quickly, the way you say something when you've rehearsed it, but the words still feel slippery in your mouth. I asked her when it had happened. She said 3 weeks ago. I said, "I see." There was a pause. Then she said my son-in-law thought it was better to keep the guest list tight, that mixing family into a professional event could muddy the optics. He had said, and she repeated this as though she was proud of how diplomatically she was delivering it, that investors like to see founders who stand on their own feet. I said, "Is that right?" She laughed a little, not cruelly, the way you laugh when you hope laughter will smooth something over before the other person notices the shape of it. "We're planning a family dinner soon," she said. "Something low-key." I thanked her. I told her I was glad the opening had gone well, and then I said I had something on the stove and I'd talk to her soon. I didn't have anything on the stove. I hung up and walked to my desk and opened the drawer where I keep the things that don't belong in filing cabinets because they belong somewhere closer. I have been building quietly since I was 26 years old. Not loudly. Not in ways that made the news or earned me a profile in a magazine. I worked a Saturday shift for 11 years at the same hospital where I started as a staff nurse because I wanted to understand every floor before I ever made a decision that touched one. I bought my first investment property the same year my daughter started high school. I sold it when she was in her 2nd year of university and used the equity to fund a registered education savings plan I'd been seeding since she was born. I did not do these things because I had money to burn. I did them because I had watched my own mother run out of runway at 63, and I promised myself that would not be me. When my daughter finished her nursing degree and then went back for her nurse practitioner program, I was proud in the way you're proud, when a child you raised becomes the person you hoped they'd become. She was sharp and careful, and she had a gift with patience that some people spend whole careers trying to develop. When she told me she wanted to open a primary care clinic in the West End of the city, I believed her completely. Her husband was already in the picture by then, a real estate lawyer, good-looking, quick with a joke, the kind of man who makes a strong impression in rooms and knows it. He had opinions about everything and delivered them like facts. I noticed early that he spoke over her sometimes, not meanly, just reflexively, the way people do when they've decided they're the smarter half of a partnership. She never corrected him. I thought at the time that it was just how they were together. The conversation about the debt happened on a Sunday in my living room, the autumn before she signed the lease on the clinic space. She came alone that day, which was unusual. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around her mug and told me that the student loans were making it impossible to qualify for the small business financing she needed. The numbers didn't work. She'd been to 2 banks. The debt-to-income ratio was the problem every single time. I asked her how much. She told me. I didn't react the way she expected me to. I didn't wince or go quiet or start talking about my own retirement. I said, "What's your business plan look like?" She pulled out a folder. I read through it for 20 minutes while she sat across from me and didn't say a word. When I was done, I asked her 4 questions. Who were her projected patient demographics? What was her liability coverage plan? Had she looked into the Ontario Health Insurance Plan billing structure for nurse practitioner-led clinics, and what happened to the clinic if something happened to her? She had answers for 3 of the 4. The 4th one, what happened if something happened to her, she hadn't thought through yet. I told her to think through it, and I told her we could talk again in 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, she came back. She had answers for all 4 questions. She also had a 5th document I hadn't asked for, a projected break-even timeline built on conservative patient volume estimates. She had done it herself. I could tell because the formatting was a little rough, but the logic was sound. I told her I would help her, and I told her that the help would be structured. She nodded like she expected that. She knew me. What she didn't know was how structured. I called my lawyer the next morning, not to protect myself from my daughter, to protect both of us from the kind of misunderstanding that money plants between people who love each other. I have seen it too many times. A parent gives money with warmth and receives it back as resentment. A child accepts money as love and forgets it was also a transaction. The only way I know to prevent that particular grief is to name things clearly before sentiment has a chance to blur them. The debt repayment was structured as a secured loan, a promissory note signed by my daughter, repayment deferred for 3 years while the clinic established itself, then a modest monthly schedule tied to her income from the practice. The clinic itself, the lease, the equipment, the build-out costs I also helped cover in a second tranche, set under a collateral agreement that gave my loan priority standing. My lawyer explained all of it to her in plain language. She read every page. She asked 2 good questions. She signed. Her husband was not in that meeting. He knew the broad shape of the arrangement because she told him. He did not know the specific terms. That was her choice, not mine. I did not hide anything. I simply did not volunteer a detailed briefing to a man who had no legal standing in the agreement. I thought about that detail a lot in the weeks after I found out about the opening. I thought about how carefully I had built the structure and how little any of it had seemed to matter to them in the daily life of that clinic. She had been running her practice for 8 months by then. The billing was healthy. The patient panel was growing. She had hired 2 medical office assistants and was in conversations with a locum physician about shared space. Everything I had believed in when I read her business plan was turning out to be true. She was doing it. She was exactly as capable as I thought she was. And somewhere in the middle of all that capability, my name had stopped appearing in the story they were telling. I noticed it gradually, the way you notice a draft in a room. At first you just feel slightly cold, and you don't know why. Then you realize a window has been open for quite some time. She stopped calling as often. When I called her, she answered, but the conversations had a new quality, a little managed, a little careful, like she was making sure nothing spilled over the edges. Her husband had started answering sometimes when I called her cell. Always pleasant, always with a reason why she was unavailable right now. She was with a patient. She was in a planning meeting. She was resting. I made a note each time. Not out of suspicion, out of habit. I have always kept notes. Around the 5th month, I asked her directly if everything was all right between us. We were on the phone. There was a pause that lasted slightly too long. She said, of course. She said she had just been busy. She said the clinic was taking everything she had right now, and she hoped I understood. I told her I understood completely. What I understood was that she was telling me the truth, and that the truth was being shaped, at least partly, by someone else. I had seen my son-in-law's influence in the way she spoke. She had started using his phrasing, words like bandwidth and optics and keeping things tight. Those were not her words. Those were words she had absorbed from living with a man who thought in terms of management. I did not say any of that to her. I simply asked her if she was happy. She said yes. I said, good, that's what I want. And I meant it. The LinkedIn post changed something in me, but not in the direction she might have feared. I wasn't angry in the way anger makes you say things. I was clear. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes when you have been patient with a situation for a long time, and the situation finally shows you its whole shape. I had been patient for 5 months. Now I could see the whole thing. I went to my desk and I opened the folder with her name on it. Not the sentimental folder, the one with the birthday cards and the photos from her graduation. The other folder, the one with the promissory note and the collateral agreement and the correspondence with my lawyer and the repayment schedule we had agreed to and never once discussed since the day she signed it. I read through it carefully, not because I had forgotten what it said, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it again. Documentation is a strange kind of comfort. It doesn't tell you how to feel. It tells you where you stand. I also opened my banking app and looked at something else entirely, the monthly e-transfer I had been sending since the clinic opened. Not connected to the loan, a separate voluntary support payment that I had set up quietly because I knew the first year of any small business is the year that breaks people who aren't prepared for the gap between receivables and actual cash in hand. OHIPE billing cycles are not short. Equipment maintenance is not cheap. I had been sending $1,500 a month with no fanfare and no conditions and no discussion because I didn't want her to feel like she had to ask. I just wanted her to have a buffer. She had never mentioned it, not once. Not a thank you text, not a reference in conversation. Nothing. I had noticed that. I had told myself it was because she was busy and because the transfer arrived automatically, and maybe she just folded it into her accounting without thinking too much about where it came from. I had given her the benefit of a long, generous doubt. The post ended the doubt. I paused the transfer that night. No message, no explanation. I simply moved the scheduled payment to pending and left it there. 4 days later, she called. It was a Wednesday morning. I was at my kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal and the CBC playing low in the background. I let the phone ring twice before I answered. Old habit from years of being on call. Never seem rushed. Always let the situation come to you. Her voice is different. The managed quality was gone. What was underneath? It was less composed. She said the e-transfer hadn't come through this month. She said she'd assumed it was a banking thing at first, but then she checked and it showed as pending from my end. She said she didn't want to bother me, but she had a payroll run at the end of the week and her cash flow was tighter than usual because of a delayed OHIPE remittance, and she was wondering if everything was okay. She said, "Is everything okay?" I let the question sit for a moment. I said, "Everything on my end is fine." She waited. I told her gently that the monthly transfer had always been voluntary, that it wasn't part of our agreement, that I had been making it because I wanted to, and that what we want can change when circumstances change. She was quiet. Then she said, "What circumstances?" I said, "I found out about the opening, sweetheart." The silence after that was a different kind of silence from the one in our other recent conversations. This one didn't feel managed. It felt like a person standing very still because the ground has shifted and they're not sure yet which direction to lean. I heard her exhale. Then I heard my son-in-law's voice somewhere close to her, low and asking something. She covered the phone for a second. When she came back, her voice was quieter. "I know, I should have called you," she said. "I know." I told her I wasn't asking for an apology over the phone. I told her I thought we should talk in person. And I told her the transfer would remain paused until we did. She said she'd come that weekend. She didn't come that weekend. She sent me a text Saturday afternoon saying something had come up with the clinic, a staffing issue. She was sorry. Could they reschedule for the following Sunday? The text used the word they. They would come. Not I. They. I said, of course. The following Sunday arrived, and so did both of them. My son-in-law came in first, holding a bag from a bakery on Wellington Street. Nice pastries, the kind you bring when you want the room to feel like goodwill rather than confrontation. He kissed my cheek. He said I looked great. He said the drive over had been fine, not much traffic for a Sunday. My daughter stood just behind him for a moment before she came and hugged me properly. Her hug was real. I could feel the effort in it, the wanting things to be okay. I held her for a second longer than I usually do, and then I let her go. We sat in the living room, not the kitchen. I had chosen the living room deliberately because the kitchen is where we talk when things are easy. The living room is where I sit when things need to be said properly. My son-in-law started. He was good at starting. He said they both knew I had seen the post and that I was probably hurt, and that they completely understood why. He said the timing of the opening had been driven by a funder deadline, and that the guest list had been necessarily small, and that no slight had been intended. He said it clearly and without pausing, the way someone says something they have rehearsed until it sounds spontaneous. Then he said he hoped we could move past it. I looked at my daughter, not at him, at her. She was looking at her hands. I asked her if that was how she saw it. She looked up. She said, "It was a business decision, Mom. We had investors there. He didn't think it was the right." "He didn't think," I said, quietly, just repeating her words. She stopped. I said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it, not him. Did you want me there that day?" The room was very quiet. My son-in-law opened his mouth. I looked at him, just a glance, and he closed it. I looked back at her. She said, "Yes, of course I did." I said, "And you let it happen anyway." She didn't answer. Her eyes were bright. I wasn't cruel. I didn't raise my voice. I have lived long enough to know that cruelty closes doors, and I had no interest in closed doors. But I also had no interest in spending the rest of my life pretending that what happened hadn't happened. I told them both that the monthly support transfer had been my choice to make and my choice to pause. I told them I was not prepared to fund a life that treated me as a footnote. I said this clearly, without drama, the way I say things when I mean them to stick. My son-in-law said the transfer had nothing to do with the opening. He said those were two separate things. He said I was conflating personal feelings with financial arrangements. I said, "You're right that they're separate. The loan agreement is separate. The transfer is separate. Both of those things are mine to manage as I see fit." He said, "With respect, Winifred, this feels a little like her." "I know what it feels like," I said. "I'm not asking how it feels. I'm telling you where I stand." My daughter put her hand on his arm, not to stop him for my sake, to stop him for hers. She had heard something in my voice that he hadn't learned to hear yet. We sat with that for a moment. Then I stood and offered them tea, because some things need a pause, and because I am, at my core, a woman who was raised to make tea when the room needs to breathe. The week after that Sunday, I received an email I hadn't expected. It came from a firm. My daughter had been in talks with a primary care network looking to bring independent clinics under a shared administrative and billing umbrella. Not a buyout, a partnership agreement. Better, OHIP rates through volume, shared EMR systems, coordinated referral pathways. It was exactly the kind of expansion that would take her clinic from viable to genuinely stable. The email was addressed to me. The contact at the network had done their due diligence, the way serious organizations do before they sign anything. They had found the collateral agreement in the provincial registry. They were writing to confirm the nature and current standing of the secured interest on the clinic's assets before they proceeded with a heads of agreement. They needed written confirmation from the secured creditor, me, that the debt was in good standing and that the collateral arrangement would not create complications for the partnership structure. I read the email twice. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer with 3 words: review and advise. She called me that afternoon. The standing was exactly what I thought it was. The network needed my written confirmation before their lawyers would proceed. Without it, the partnership was at minimum delayed, possibly restructured, possibly reconsidered. My daughter called me the next morning. Her voice had changed again. The composure she had been holding for months was thinner now, stretched over something she couldn't quite conceal. She said, "Mom, I think you got an email about the network partnership." I said I had. She said, "We really need that to move forward. It would change everything for the clinic. The billing rates alone would." I let her talk. She knew the numbers better than I did, and she explained them clearly, the way she explains things when she cares deeply about them. I listened to all of it. When she was done, I said, "I know. I read the proposal." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, "So you'll send the confirmation?" I said, "I'm going to take a few days to think about it." She said, "Mom." "I heard you," I said, "and I'll be in touch." I think it was that afternoon, or maybe the one after, when she came over without texting first, just knocked on my door. She didn't bring her husband. She stood on my step with her coat still on, her face without the composure it usually wore, and she looked, for a moment, like the girl she used to be when something had happened at school that she didn't know how to carry by herself. I let her in. She sat down at the kitchen table. Not the living room this time. She chose the kitchen herself. She wrapped her hands around a mug of tea I made her, and she was quiet for a long time before she said anything. She said, "I told him I wanted you there, that night I mean, before we sent the invitations." I waited. She said he had made a case for keeping it to the professional circle, that it would look cleaner, that introducing family into an investor event created the wrong impression about the clinic's independence, that she had let him convince her because she was tired and because she trusted his read on these things, and because somewhere in the middle of trying to build something she had started making herself smaller so that he could feel larger. She didn't say that last part as a complaint. She said it like a woman identifying something in herself she hadn't let herself see before. I said, "Is that how it's been?" She looked at her tea. Then she looked at me. "He's not a bad person, Mom. He likes to be the one who understands how things work. And I've let him be that, even when it cost me things I didn't mean to let go." I thought about all the things I could say. I thought about the months of managed conversations and the missing phone calls and the post on LinkedIn and her name in the caption where my presence should have been somewhere in the room. I said, "I know he's not a bad person. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to stop disappearing." She was quiet again. Then she said, "The confirmation." I said, "The confirmation has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now." She looked at me. I said, "The confirmation is a business matter. I'm going to handle it properly, the way I handle business matters. But that's separate from this. Right now, I'm talking to my daughter." I saw something shift in her face, not relief, not quite. Something quieter, The kind of shift that happens when a person realizes they have been bracing for impact for so long, they forgot what it felt like to just be in the room. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon, not about the clinic or the loan or the network partnership, about her, about the years since she had married and how much of herself she had been folding away to keep the peace, about her father, my late husband, who would have had opinions about all of this, and whose name we said out loud a few times, and it felt like he was nearby, about the work she was doing that was genuinely good and genuinely hers, even when the story being told about it had started to leave out some important things. When she left, she hugged me at the door for a long time. She said, "I'm sorry, Mom." She said it like she meant all of it and not any one specific piece of it. I said, "I know." The confirmation letter went out through my lawyer 2 days later. Clean, factual, professional. The debt was in good standing. The collateral arrangement was not in default. The secured interest would not complicate a standard partnership agreement provided the network's counsel reviewed the priority structure, which was standard practice and required no unusual accommodation. The partnership moved forward. The monthly transfer did not resume automatically. I had a conversation with my daughter about it, just the two of us, and I was clear. The transfer had been voluntary and now it would be intentional, which meant it would be connected to something real between us rather than running quietly in the background like a utility payment. We agreed on a family dinner every other Sunday. We agreed she would call me herself when she had something to tell me. Not big things, just things. The ordinary kind of things that hold people together. Her husband adapted. He didn't apologize to me, not in words, but he stopped managing my access to her, and that was close enough. I have learned, at 64 years old, not to require performances of people. I require behavior I can work with. The network partnership opened its doors in the spring. There was a reception. I was there. My daughter introduced me to 3 colleagues and a funder, and when she said my name, she said it without hesitation and without apology. Her husband shook my hand and told the funder that I had been instrumental in the clinic's early foundation. It was more than I had expected from him, and I received it graciously. On the drive home, I thought about the drawer at my desk and the folder with her name on it, and the morning I sat in my kitchen reading a LinkedIn post like a stranger. I thought about what it had cost me to stay quiet for 5 months, and what it had cost her to stay small for longer than that. I thought about what my mother used to say when I was young and too proud to ask for help. There is no weakness in knowing what you're owed. She meant it about wages, about the world treating women fairly for their work. But I have always thought it applied to every other kind of debt as well. Not every debt is financial. Some are older than money. The ones that matter most are the ones you carry forward into the people who come after you. My daughter is carrying herself differently now, straighter, less apologetic in rooms where she is the most qualified person present. She calls me on Tuesdays for no reason at all sometimes, just to talk, and I hear the person she was before she learned to make herself convenient, coming back into her own voice. That is worth more than any amount I ever put in a folder. But I will say this quietly, to anyone listening who has ever been asked to fund something and then edited out of the story, the structure you build before you sign the check is not distrust, it is respect for yourself, for the person you're helping, for the truth that money and love can coexist without either one destroying the other, as long as someone in the room is willing to name what's real. I named it, and everything that happened after happened because I had built something solid enough to stand on when the ground got soft. There's a moment somewhere in the middle of all of this that I keep coming back to, not the LinkedIn post, not the phone call about the payroll. The moment I remember most clearly is sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning with a bowl of oatmeal going cold, watching steam rise off my coffee, and knowing, not suspecting, knowing that something had been quietly taken from me. Not money, not a seat at a table, the willingness to pretend I hadn't noticed. I think about what it took to get to that morning, 31 years of showing up to work before the building was warm. Decades of reading contracts and running numbers and making decisions that nobody clapped for because good decisions rarely come with applause. I did not build what I built because I was talented, though I hope I was. I built it because I refused to look away from hard things. That refusal, that steady, unglamorous insistence on seeing clearly, is the thing that saved me when it mattered. And what mattered in the end was not what my son-in-law did. He did what people like him do when they feel the edges of their control softening. He managed, he positioned, he used polished language to draw lines that served him while calling it professionalism. I understand that kind of person. I have sat across from that kind of person at closing tables for 30 years. What mattered was Lauren, my daughter, the woman I watched become herself and then watched quietly fold herself away to keep a peace that was costing her more than she was willing to admit out loud. The day she came to my door without texting first, coat still on, no husband, no rehearsed explanation, that was the moment the whole thing shifted. Not because she apologized, because she told me the truth. There is a kind of courage in that, the ordinary, unglamorous kind that I think we undervalue. It is not the courage of grand gestures. It is the courage of sitting down at your mother's kitchen table and saying the thing you have been avoiding, because saying it means you have to live with having seen it. I have always believed that the choices we make when no one is watching are the ones that build us or hollow us out. Lauren had been making hollowing choices for a while. Not because she was weak, because she had stopped trusting her own judgment in the presence of someone who was very confident in his. That is a different thing, and it deserves a different response than judgment. What I gave her was not punishment. What I gave her was consequence, which is different. Consequence says, this is how things actually work. Consequence says, your choices have weight, and so do mine. Consequence, when it comes from love, is the most honest thing one person can offer another. The structure I had built, the promissory note, the collateral agreement, the secured interest sitting quietly in a provincial registry, was not distrust dressed up as paperwork. It was the opposite. It was me saying, before any of this happened, that I respected her enough to treat our arrangement like it was real. That I respected myself enough not to hand over $174,000 on sentiment alone. She is carrying herself differently now. I notice it in small ways. The way she talks about her work without waiting for his approval first. The way she calls on Tuesdays for no particular reason. Those are not small things to me. Those are the things I worked and saved and structured and waited for. The network partnership is open. The clinic is stable, and my daughter is becoming, slowly and on her own terms, the person she was always going to be before she learned to make herself convenient. That is what I was protecting all along, not the money. Her.